Hi, this is going to be day 3 of the 30-day HackerRank challenge. And so, remember day 3 is really day 4 for us. It starts at 0. So, what is this problem saying? This problem is looking at conditionals. Essentially, else if, or else statements when you're talking about Python. When you're talking about C++, the syntax is going to be slightly different, but I was able to copy the Python code over, change it within a few short seconds, and it works for C++. So we'll go through both examples, and hopefully you like these and continue the 30-day challenge. Within this, you're given an integer, and the platform on HackerRank scrapes the integer and the input to essentially allow you to just do operations on that particular data type. Well, it's saying that if it's odd, you're supposed to print a certain value, that if it's even after the fact that it's not odd, then you'll be looking in a certain range of 2 to 5. If it's even and in 2 to 5, then it's not weird. But if it's 6 within the range 6 to 20, it is weird. And if it's anything, if the integer is anywhere above 20, then essentially it is not weird. So this is one of the easiest problems you'll get with if, or else statements. Essentially, right here, you want to see if it divides by 2, because every integer divides by 2 equally, or it can divide into 2 with no remainders or with a 0 remainder. In the following ones, you have to check the boundary conditions. So in this case, you have to check if it's 2 to 5, within 2 to 5, or if it's in 6 to 20, or if it's greater than 20. And you have to be very careful when you're talking about inclusive versus exclusive. In this case, we're only concerned about a bound or a bracket for each left and right value. In this case, we can go forward and look at the Python solution. What's provided going into the problem is, is line 1 through line 12. And what this is saying is, since it's probably running on a Linux machine in the background, it's running a bash script to determine if your program is coming up with the right solution. Normally, you don't have to include the bash script header up top. That's only for if you're running this in the background, or if you're running this on the command line. Going further, we have a couple different modules that are imported that we won't use here. Here it's just straight Python syntax. And later on, when we're talking about different LeetCode problems and talking about algorithm design, we'll look at a package called scaling. Scaling essentially can determine runtime efficiencies for blocks of code and per line. It also helps differentiate how much Python code versus how much imported or library code you use. So it's very useful. In this scenario, it's checking to see if it's the main program. And if it's the main program, then it's allowed to run the following below. Essentially, it takes the input, which is going to be a raw string, it strips it, so it takes out all the white spaces, and then it converts it to an integer. From there, you can then use the modulo operator, and %2, to determine if it's equal or not equal to 0. And in this case, we can say if it's not equal to 0, this switch condition short circuits, and you're only running the left part of the conditional to provide the weird printout. If it is even, then it has to run through the entire conditional, and so it looks to see if it's above 6, or equal or above 6, depending on the inclusive bracket that's defined within the problem, as well if it's below or equal to 20, once again defined by the inclusive statement within the problem. If it matches those criteria, then it's going to print out weird. However, you have to be aware that this conditional can short circuit at the OR position, but as soon as it passes OR, there's an AND conditional that requires both these statements to be true. And so, for example, if n is 50, it's greater than 6, but is not less than 20, so that conditional ends up being false because both of them have to be true. And if everything in the conditional, the first conditional, the if statement, is not true, then it goes to the next one. In this case, we don't have any more test cases or statements of interest for the problem that we're looking at, so it's going to use an else statement and print the result. If we had something else here, we can always do an else if, or for Python, it's going to be an elif, like this. And then run another conditional, but in this case, it doesn't require that. Going to C++, from the elegant Python, you'll see that C++ requires at least 46 lines, and Python requires only 16 with 3 extra spaces in the middle. So essentially 13 to 46. The comparison for a simple conditional switched problem is phenomenal. And this goes to show that Python is really the language you should be using on most applications, except for if they're data intensive. And we'll go through different applications and algorithms as we progress through this video series. So C++ provides a lot of different tools to be able to handle lower level aspects of the operating system. In this case, HackerRank provides a lot of generic code to be able to strip both the left and the right side. Remember, we did that with the method of input dot strip, and that takes care of both the left trim and the right trim. In this scenario, you have to define or declare the function ahead of time. If it's not defined and it's not implemented, then you'll have to essentially make a declaration that you're going to implement it later. And so you have a return value of string from this method, or I guess this function, since it's not associated with a class. And the left trim and the right trim takes in a constant reference to a string variable. So remember, there's two different types of parameters. You have references, and you have, or I guess, pass by value or pass by reference. In this case, it's passing by reference, which means that you can actually manipulate the variable going into the function. What's interesting is, even though it's a pass by reference, it's providing a constant, I guess, additional requirement onto the variable. And from my understanding in C++, this means that it's faster because you're providing a memory address associated with the variable, but you're not allowed to change the information defined at the memory address. So instead of passing by value, where you have to copy the variable into the new function, it goes a lot faster because you essentially pass a pointer to that particular memory address without having the option to change it within the function. So if we go down to the different functions, which are going to be very similar because they're performing similar, I guess, features or functionalities, except for one's on the left and one's on the right side of the string variable. So in this case, we'll just go through the left trim function. And so you're given the input, which is passed by reference, to the variable, the string variable, str. This str is then used to define another string variable, string. So if you're using it to define another string variable, it may have been easier just to pass by value, since it's going to essentially take similar runtime complexities because you're performing the same operation. But in this case, it makes it hidden to the end user, and essentially makes it a black box, so you don't know what's happening to this str, but it's essentially the same as pass by value. So what happens now is you use one of the string methods defined within the STL library, which is going to be arrays. It uses different operations within it to work on memory addresses. So essentially you're taking the first memory slot of the S string variable, and then if you can find it, then essentially you perform more functionality on it. And we won't go through this now, but it'll be important later on what this actually means. And then after, you return the string variable that you created within the function, which is going to be S. So all that's required to trim your input, so going back to the main function within this source code, you have to define a string variable. In this, it's going to be ntemp. Ntemp is then used to store the standard input or get line, and using cn, which is sen, associated with standard input. And then use a string to integer conversion associated with the standard library stoi after you use the left and right trim functions on the ntemp string at this point. And so after it goes through rtrim and left trim functions, then it converts it to an integer, and you store it back in a new integer, a newly defined variable n, which once again for C++ you have to define the type ahead of time, static typing. In this case, like I was telling you before, you can essentially copy Python and transfer it over. And how you switch the syntax around, you have to add brackets for if, and you could add them for else, but if it's only one line, then all you have to do is just put it below the if or the else, and that suffices in C++. So once again, there are two other features associated with transitioning to C++ from Python. You have to use an OR, which is a double pipe, and then you have to use an AND, which is double ampersand. And that will perform the same short circuit checking and full conditional checking that we talked about earlier. And then the return 0 is just making sure that it returns to whatever caller was asking for it. So the callee just says that the source code performed the way it should have, and there were no problems. I hope you continue to follow this. Please stay tuned for the next couple days as we go through the rest of the 30-day HackerRank Challenge. Then we'll be transitioning to LeetCode. Once again, please like, comment, and subscribe, and check out SIG Crypto when you can. Thank you for your time, and have a great day. Bye.